This is the story of a shadow, a whisper, and the unexpected roar of engines that became a beacon of safety in a place where hope was fading fast. We're in a quiet, almost forgotten corner of suburban America, the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happens, which is exactly what makes the terror so insidious when it creeps in. This is about the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, men often painted by the media and the law as the darkest kind of outlaws. But tonight, they were the last, best hope for a little boy and his mother. The air was thick and heavy, not just with humidity, but with a palpable sense of dread that had been growing inside the small two-bedroom house for weeks. Sarah held her son, 7-year-old Leo, tight on the worn couch. She knew the police reports, the restraining orders, the legal papers. They were just thin sheets of paper, meaningless barriers against a monster who refused to stay gone. Her ex-husband, a man consumed by toxic obsession and a history of unpredictable violence, was violating every decree. He was back. Not inside, not yet, but he was always near. He was a presence, a heavy weight pressing against the thin walls of their sanctuary. Leo, usually a whirlwind of energy and youthful laughter, was frozen, his small body trembling. His eyes, wide and luminous in the dim living room light, darted nervously toward the back window, the source of their most recent trauma. He pulled the blanket up to his chin, his voice barely audible, a fragile thread of sound in the terrifying silence of the house. He whispered, "He's back at the window." That simple, horrifying phrase was the breaking point. Sarah felt a cold spike of panic, but beneath it, something hard and resolute snapped into place. She had exhausted every conventional avenue. The police were tired of the calls, they filed reports, but until he actually broke down the door, they couldn't stay. They saw it as a domestic dispute, a slow-burn custody battle. Sarah saw it as a countdown. She reached for the burner phone she kept hidden under the mattress. This was her last resort. The contact she had been given years ago by a former co-worker, a man she barely knew but who had mentioned, almost in passing, that sometimes the ones people call bad are the only ones willing to truly risk it all for justice. The contact was Sarge, a man with a reputation as long and dark as the road he often rode. He was a high-ranking member of the Bandidos MC. Calling them felt like stepping off a cliff, but the alternative was waiting for the inevitable. The call connected quickly. Sarge's voice was a low, gravelly rumble, the sound of an engine idling. Sarah didn't bother with pleasantries. She didn't have the breath for it. She just repeated Leo's words, her voice catching on the edges of fear. "He's back at the window. He's stalking us. I need the help you offered." Sarge didn't ask for details, didn't demand explanations or interrogate her about her past. There was a pause, a brief moment where the reality of what she was asking hung in the air. Then the response came, simple and utterly firm, a promise delivered from the dark side of the road. "Stay put. Lock everything. We're on our way. Do not open the door for anyone else." Click. The line went dead. Sarah sank back onto the couch, holding Leo, listening to the silence. It wasn't empty, though. It was filled with the sound of her own frantic heartbeats and the terrifying possibility that she had made a terrible mistake. She had invited the wolves to protect her from the fox, but she had to trust the desperation that drove her. 30 minutes later, the suburb's unnerving quiet was violently shattered. It started as a distant, deep thrum, a sound that vibrated more in the chest than in the ear. It grew rapidly, multiplying into a synchronized thunder, the unmistakable roar of multiple high-performance V-twin engines running hard. This wasn't a single bike passing by. This was a formation, a convoy of chrome and steel descending on their quiet street. Leo lifted his head, no longer trembling but captivated. The sound was too big to be just scary. It was awe-inspiring. Sarah crept to the front window, peeling back the edge of the blind just enough to peer out. The streetlights caught the procession, a line of motorcycles, polished metal gleaming, leather vests bearing the fearsome patch, and the riders themselves, big, imposing men whose very presence seemed to warp the suburban landscape around them. They rode with precision, pulling up directly in front of her house and silently cutting their engines. The sudden, profound silence after the roar was almost louder than the engines had been. It was an announcement. The Bandidos MC had arrived. Sarge, a mountain of a man with a stern face etched by years under the sun and the moon, dismounted smoothly. He wore his colors like a suit of armor. He was flanked by two other members, both equally formidable. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They simply walked toward the house. And that's when the objective of the mission became clear. These weren't just men looking to scare off a petty intruder. They were here for protection, for justice, and for the peace that paper and police protocol had failed to deliver. They walked with the authority of men who live by their own code, a code that tonight designated them as protectors. Sarge stopped on the porch, his shadow enormous against the cheap siding. He didn't knock. He simply stood there, a silent sentinel. The other two men immediately began a systematic, slow patrol of the perimeter of the house, focusing on the dark spots, the bushes, and particularly the backyard window that had been Leo's nightmare. Their movements were practiced, almost military. They weren't looking to cause trouble. They were looking to end trouble. Inside, Sarah finally let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She moved toward the door, her hand hovering over the lock, ready to let in the men who were often labeled as the bad guys, but who, at this moment, felt like the only heroes she had ever known. She had traded the fear of a single man for the protective presence of an entire club. The risk felt necessary, the relief overwhelming, but the night was far from over. The patrolling members had stopped at the back of the house near the old oak tree. The light was bad, but they were scanning the area with an intensity that missed nothing. One of them, a man known simply as Ghost, raised his hand, a universal sign for halt and attention. He had seen something, a flicker of movement in the dense shadows beyond the fence line. The man who had been terrorizing them was close. He was always close. The standoff had officially begun. The Bandidos MC walked toward the house, but now they were walking toward the confrontation. The silent signal from Ghost was all it took. Sarge, still standing like a statue of granite on the front porch, didn't move an inch, but his awareness sharpened, extending like a sixth sense to encompass the entire property. The man known as Ripper, patrolling the other side of the house, had already received the message through the club's non-verbal, practiced communication. They were moving in sync, a perfect, predatory circle closing around the vulnerable house. This wasn't bravado. This was a strategic containment developed over years of self-preservation, now being used for altruistic protection. Inside, Sarah had peeked through the slit of the door's peephole, confirming it was Sarge. She didn't open it immediately. She watched as Ghost and Ripper approached the fence line, their massive silhouettes seeming to absorb the faint light of the distant street lamp. They didn't draw weapons, not yet. Their sheer presence, their stillness, was the first line of defense. A deliberate escalation of intimidation designed to test the resolve of the stalker. The atmosphere outside crackled. The ex-husband, referred to in the legal documents only as the respondent, was a coward whose bravery evaporated the moment he faced a real threat, especially one he couldn't control or intimidate. He was used to the fear of a lone woman and the predictable, slow-moving nature of the law. He was not prepared for the swift, uncompromising arrival of a Bandidos formation. Ghost, who had been an army ranger before finding his family in the MC, spoke first, his voice a low, carrying monotone that cut through the silence like a knife. "Show yourself. We know you're there. The fun and games are over." There was no threat of violence, only a statement of fact, a declaration of ownership over this patch of land for the duration of the night. The threat was implied in their very existence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a branch snapped deep in the shadows of the neighboring yard. The sound was amplified, a confession in the stillness. Ripper, never one for patience, took 2 heavy steps forward, his boots crunching loudly on the dry grass. "Last chance to walk away, friend. This is a private matter now, and you are trespassing on our protection detail." The man finally emerged. He was furtive, slicked back hair, cheap jacket, holding a worn-out pair of binoculars. He was initially furious, his face contorted in a sneer that quickly morphed into shock and then raw terror as he realized who he was facing. He recognized the colors. Everyone in this county recognized the colors. He had expected to see a lonely woman, maybe a police cruiser. He found a wall of hardened steel. What is this? Get off this property. This is harassment, he stammered, his bravado failing him spectacularly. He tried to puff out his chest, to regain the control he lived for, but it was useless against the immovable authority of the Bandidos. Sarge, from the porch, took a single slow step off the wood, moving onto the grass. His voice was a thunderclap, instantly commanding attention and reducing the ex-husband's pathetic challenge to a squeak. You've been served your final warning, pal. The legal documents mean nothing to us, but the safety of the woman and child in that house means everything. You are disrupting the peace and causing distress. That is against our code. You are done here. The ex-husband, seeing his entire support structure of fear crumble, made a desperate, stupid move. He threw the binoculars into the bushes and stumbled backward, intending to flee the way he came. But the Bandidos had anticipated this. Ripper moved with a surprising economy of motion for a man his size, not tackling, but stepping into the path of retreat, blocking it completely. Ghost mirrored him from the other side. The man was boxed in, not physically restrained, but mentally cornered. The message was clear. There was no escape, only the choice to cooperate or face consequences far outside the realm of civil law. We are not the police, Ghost stated, his eyes cold and unwavering. We are simply ensuring that a mother and her son can sleep tonight without fear. You violated your agreement. You have become a persistent danger. We are correcting the problem. The man, defeated and shaking, tried one last desperate tactic. They're just paying you, aren't they? To scare me? I'll call the cops. Sarge simply pointed to the end of the street, where 2 more motorcycles had just pulled up, riders waiting silently, observing. Go ahead. Call them. We'll wait. But know this. You leave this street, and you never come back. If we ever see your shadow near this house again, or hear that you have caused them a single moment of distress, we will handle it our way. And our way is permanent. This was the core of the Bandidos' moral code, the anti-hero promise. They would provide a protection the system could not, using means the system would not condone. They weren't interested in a legal conviction. They were interested in absolute peace for the innocent. They were using their reputation, their badness, as a shield. The ex-husband looked into the eyes of these men and saw a resolve that was terrifying because it was non-negotiable and outside the law. He saw not criminals looking for a fight, but protectors who had made a pact. With a whimper, not a roar, he dropped his resistance. I'm going, he mumbled, his voice tight with panic. Sarge, maintaining his distance, gestured toward a clear path leading away from the street and back toward the main road. Walk, don't look back, and consider this a permanent change of address for you. The ex-husband scrambled away, his movements jerky and fast, disappearing into the suburban night, not chased, but expelled by the sheer force of the Bandidos' collective will. The threat was gone, not contained, but eradicated from their immediate sphere of influence. The relief was immediate and total. Inside the house, Leo, safe in his mother's arms, heard the engines revving softly in the distance as the man fled. He knew the thunder was gone. He looked up at his mother and whispered, not in fear, but in wonder, "The bike men saved us." The confrontation was over, but the consolidation of power was just beginning. Sarge reascended the porch, not to leave, but to speak with Sarah. He had a plan for the next few days, a rotational watch, a system of checks and balances to ensure the man's departure wasn't a temporary bluff. This wasn't a one-night fix. It was a commitment to the family's future security. The Bandidos were now their silent, watchful guardians. The immediate tension had dissolved, replaced by a quiet, profound exhaustion. With the perpetrator gone, expelled by the sheer force of their presence, the Bandidos didn't simply ride off into the night. That would have been the action of hired thugs. The true difference in their code was revealed in their commitment to follow through, to ensure the job was done completely, securing the lasting safety and peace the family desperately needed. Sarge stood on the porch, his posture relaxing only slightly. He wasn't intimidating Sarah, he was reassuring her. He spoke in the same low rumble, but now the tone was instructive, paternal even. "We're not leaving you exposed, Sarah. That was phase 1. He's running scared, but fear fades. Phase 2 is security. Ghost and Ripper will stay on site until sunrise. Another crew is coming to relieve them. For the next 72 hours, this property is under constant watch. No one gets near without an invitation." Sarah felt the sting of tears in her eyes, not of fear, but of gratitude so immense it was crippling. She reached out, placing a hand on Sarge's massive, leather-clad arm. I don't know how I can ever repay you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Sarge looked down at her, his stern face softening slightly at the edges. "You don't. You live safe, and you raise that boy without the shadow of that man hanging over him. That's the payment. We don't do this for money, Sarah. We do this for the code, for the small sliver of justice that the system often misses." He paused, then added, "You keep our number. If he so much as sends a text, you call us immediately. We will adjust the security detail accordingly." He turned to look at Leo, who was peeking around his mother's leg, no longer terrified, but utterly mesmerized by the men on the motorcycles. Sarge gave the boy a brief, almost imperceptible nod of respect. It was a silent promise to the child. "You are safe now." As dawn broke over the suburban street, painting the sky in hues of soft orange and pink, the Bandidos began to systematically withdraw. It wasn't a retreat, but a measured rotation. 2 new riders arrived on their touring bikes, their faces fresh but their commitment just as deep. They exchanged silent nods with Ghost and Ripper, who then started their engines, the deep thrum of the V-twins, a new comforting lullaby for the neighborhood, a sound now associated with safety, not menace. The sheer normalcy of the next few days was the miracle. Leo played in the backyard for the first time in months, not once glancing fearfully toward the fence. Sarah felt the heavy weight lift from her shoulders, the constant, gnawing anxiety finally receding. Every time she looked out, she saw a rider parked unobtrusively down the street, reading a book or cleaning chrome, a visible, powerful deterrent. The neighborhood gossips, who had surely noticed the sudden presence of the notorious motorcycle club, kept their distance and their comments quiet. Even they understood that sometimes real protection doesn't wear a uniform. The 72 hours passed, and on the final night, Sarge returned alone. He walked the perimeter one last time, checking the security, his eyes assessing the environment with practiced expertise. He confirmed that the ex-husband had not only fled the immediate area, but had reportedly left the state, terrified by the unspoken but very real threat of the Bandidos' enforcement. Their reputation, which usually served to strike fear, had been repurposed as a tool for peace. "It's done, Sarah," Sarge said, finally standing at her open door, the barrier between them symbolic of the trust they had built. "He's gone. We've made it clear to him and to anyone else who might want to cause trouble that this house is protected. Permanently. You are part of our family now, under our eye. Live your life." He didn't ask for thanks again. He just gave her a simple, heavy leather key fob, embossed with the club's logo. "If you ever feel unsafe again, press this button. It connects directly to our dispatch, day or night. Don't call the police. Call your family." Sarah took the fob, the weight of the leather feeling like the heaviest, most precious gift she had ever received. It was a tangible piece of their protection, a symbol of a dangerous loyalty that had saved her life and her son's innocence. This was the moment of realization. These men, the so-called outlaws, were the true upholders of justice, the ones who stepped into the vacuum left by failed institutions. As Sarge swung his leg over his bike and the engine roared to life, a final, affirming thunder, Leo rushed to the window, watching the large figure ride away. He didn't see a dangerous biker. He saw a knight on a steel horse. This is the hidden truth about the men of the road, the ones who live by their own rules. They are the shadows, yes, but sometimes only the shadows can truly fight the darkness. They don't seek glory, and they don't want thanks. They seek justice, delivered swiftly and decisively. They are the Bandidos MC, and for Sarah and Leo, they will forever be the heroes who arrived when the world had given up on them, summoned by a quiet whisper, and the fear of a little boy who looked out his window and saw the true meaning of protection. The roar of the engines faded, but the peace they brought remained absolute and unbreakable.